We're starting. Okay.
So I will do anything else.
Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Θέλουμε να σας καλωσορίσουμε στο θερινό σχολείο του Akadimias Hub. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που είστε σήμερα εδώ μαζί μας. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ και το online ακροατήριο. Είναι η δεύτερη μέρα του θερινού σχολείου, το οποίο είναι μόνο για τα μέλη της ΕΣΗΕΑ. Έχουμε ετοιμάσει για σας ομιλίες σχετικά με τα νέα επιχειρήματα. Ελπίζω να σας αρέσει αυτό που θα δείτε. Για περισσότερες πληροφορίες μπορείτε πάντα να επισκεφτείτε το site μας akadimiashub.eu ή να δείτε τη δουλειά που κάνουμε στο Εργαστήριο Νέων Τεχνολογιών στο Τμήμα Επικοινωνίας του Πανεπιστημίου Αθηνών. Έχω εδώ πέρα τον κύριο Μουρλά, ο οποίος θα ήθελε να έρθει να πει μια κουβέντα, όπως μου έκανε και εμένα στο συνέδριο πριν. Οπότε ανεβείτε να πείτε ένα γεια. Και μετά συνεχίζουμε σε 2 λεπτά με την πρώτη μας ομιλία από τον πρώην διευθυντή του Digital News Initiative, Ludovic Blesse. Come Kostas to say something before we start.
I think we said everything.
Yeah, στα ελληνικά.
Ωραία, λοιπόν. Ναι, είναι μια προσπάθεια εξωστρέφειας βασικά του Πανεπιστημίου, του Τμήματος Επικοινωνίας, του Εργαστηρίου, προσπαθώντας ό,τι ανακαλύπτουμε, ερευνούμε μέσα στο εργαστήριο, να τα δώσουμε και στην κοινωνία και στους επαγγελματίες δημοσιογράφους, κάτι το οποίο πιστεύουμε ότι πρέπει να υπάρχει και να προσπαθήσουμε να δώσουμε αυτή τη σύνδεση, να την κάνουμε πιο έντονη, να φέρουμε κοντά λοιπόν, ιδίως στην εποχή των νέων τεχνολογιών, της επανάστασης πληροφορικής, της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης, που τα πράγματα τρέχουν τόσο πολύ και υπάρχουν τόσα ερωτήματα από επαγγελματικούς συνδέσμους όπως η ΕΣΗΕΑ, να δούμε μαζί με τους δημοσιογράφους, να λύσουμε αυτά τα προβλήματα, να πούμε τη δική μας άποψη, να κάνουμε ένα δημιουργικό διάλογο, και αυτή είναι η αρχή για μας, μια προσπάθεια σύνδεσης της τριτοβάθμιας εκπαίδευσης με το training, με την διαρκή εκπαίδευση που θεωρούμε ότι πρέπει να υπάρχει στο επαγγελματικό χώρο των δημοσιογράφων, και πιστεύουμε ότι θα υπάρχουν επιπλέον καινούργιες τέτοιες συνέργειες. Ευχαριστώ πολύ την διοίκηση της ΕΣΗΕΑ για αυτή που μας δέχτηκε, και έχουμε εδώ ένα πολύ ωραίο περιβάλλον, και πιστεύω ότι θα είμαστε πάλι κοντά σε επόμενα βήματα. Καλή συνέχεια, καλή επιτυχία. We have Ludovic with us, perfect startup thinker, and you know that you have worked in many interesting places, especially in the Google initiative, that you have shown so many different approaches of different startups and works in the journalist environment. So we are happy to have you with you, and we enjoy your talk.
Okay, let's wait a minute for the president of the Journalists Union to say. Or you can.
We would like to thank you all for being here. It's a great honor for the union, and we welcome you once more.
It's okay. The president will be here. She's delayed, unfortunately, at her office, but she wants to come down and give you a warm welcome herself. I won't take any of your time. I'm Vera Zarvakaki. Thank you very much. It's a great honor for us having you here.
Okay, and now is the third time we start.
I can start. Thank you very much. Let's start with something a bit distracting, and then we can have a conversation. Who like football or soccer, as they say in the US? Who like football in the room? Almost everyone, right? Okay. So I'm French, as you can see as you can hear with my accent. Who like the French team? Okay. So you think you know the French team, but what you see is not necessarily what you get or what is happening. So let's have a look.
Oui, c'est passé. Oui, bien sûr que c'est passé. Maintenant, faut que ça aille au bout. Ouais, c'est bien joué. Bien plus qu'un. Allez, c'est pénalty, ça. Les bleus qui reviennent dans le match. Qui est touché par les frappes. Là, il y a un fond ballon pour jouer.
Bien fait le.
Okay, and now the truth. Okay, I'll stop here because you get it, but this is actually the French female team playing here, and not the male. I really like it, and it's not totally new. I think it has been done 2 years ago or 1 year and a half ago when we started talking a lot about generative AI. For me, it kind of summarized everything. And probably the main challenge we are facing as an industry or as journalists, all about trust, all about engaging your audience in a way that you can rebuild trust, because trust is very easy to destroy and it takes a lot of time to build. And I think this is probably the main issue and the main challenge of the industry. It talks also about ethics, it talks about the use of AI, the use of innovation and everything. So for me, it's a very good starting point. My name is Ludovic Blecher. I've been a reporter, an editor-in-chief for a couple of years. I was editor-in-chief of Libération in France. The last 10 years, almost the last 10 years, I worked for Google, where I set up initiative first in Europe called the NI Fund. Maybe some of you applied to that. And then we created the Google News Initiative. I was in charge of innovation. I'm one of those that managed to take 500 million to Google to inject into the news ecosystem for innovation. So it was Google money, but it was not about Google product. And it was really about stimulating the ecosystem, so that gives you the opportunity to see a lot of stuff. I left Google 1 year and a half ago, and I will take you a bit through my journey. I basically launched a tech company that is building a full stack product from CMS, CRM, and all this kind of stuff for publishers. I will tell you more. Basically, they asked me to walk you through how, as a journalist, you become a product person, an entrepreneur, and a business mindset. So I will try to share that. But I think, first of all, we always need to step back and look at, try to understand why the industry is in the situation we are in today. This is a cover from, what's going on? Yeah, so that was an article that was published in 14 years ago. It's been published in The Guardian, and the title was, "Can iPad Save Newspapers?" I think it says a lot, because we are always seeking for a silver bullet to save us. And that will not happen. And journalism is different than the publishing industry. So newspaper is one thing, but what needs to be protected at the end of the day, even more, is the ability to produce investigative stories, to be on the front line, well, to do the work, basically, and fact-checking and stuff. And when an industry that is struggling that much is waiting for something to save us, it means that we are not able to really disrupt ourselves as we should in order to define or redefine our model. I'm not saying it's easy, but there is no other way because no one will save us. And we've seen that same back in time. At the beginning, we were putting all our content for free. And traffic will help. And advertising will save us. Again, that was bullshit. It helped only the platform. And of course, it was easy after that to say, this is the platform that took over our business. That is not true. They have a responsibility, of course, but they didn't take the cake. We basically let them take everything because we were not able to act as an industry and to figure out how to tackle this completely new digital era. I'm not going to go into the details, but I think it's very well summarized by Clay Christensen. To me, he was one of the best thinkers about disruptive innovation. And we didn't quite understand how quickly things fall off the cliff in this industry. And of course, when you used to have a business built on classified, for example, advertising and classified, and you used to have people paying for that, when you have Craigslist that is making classified for free, it's a massive disruption, and it's very hard to self-disrupt yourself in order to put for free what you used to sell before and figure out a business model there. Anyway, at some point we raised paywalls and we started having some readers' revenue models. I think it was a very good news. So some started very early on, others more in around 2010, 2012, and more. First the large player, the B2B players, and then some smaller players. I think it's been a very good news for journalism, for two reasons. One, it forces you to produce, I don't like the word quality, but let's say original / exclusive / in-depth content, right? Because it's all about engagement of the audience. They trust you, they trust the brand, they want you to continue doing so. This is a good relationship that forces to go into more expertise and to really do the job. The other good news is that, we like it or not, I think it has kind of saved journalism, because some models are working, not everywhere, but some are working. And I would say it works both sides of the spectrum. So you are a very big one, Le Monde in France, the New York Times, the Global. So you have your subscription model and you have niches. It can be B2B niche or it can be more individual, but you have niches that are also able to build their business model. The problem is in between, of course. So I'm not saying it's magical, but at least it works a bit. For me, the main pitfall of the reader's revenue model is that quality information stays within the elite bubble, the intellectual elite bubble. Not just because you are willing and you are able to pay, but also because you want to pay to support this kind of activity. And having quality information mainly within the bubble is a real issue that create gaps that are terrible, and unsure how to address that. Anyway, a couple of consideration, and please feel free to interrupt if you have any question. We are not that many in the room. I'm happy to take question. Any question for now? Get ready, you will have the floor. Huh? I'm not going to talk for half an hour. Okay, I just want to touch on a couple of observations through the initiative I run at Google. So again, it was through different programs, $500 million, mainly dedicated to innovative product. Okay, and not about Google product, but really about, it could be paywall evolution, it could be specific apps, it could be engagement model, it could be use of blockchain and fact-checking and this kind of stuff. So a lot of projects. We funded about 6,000 projects in 115 countries. And I think I have two main learnings here. I was absolutely struck by the level of tech overlap. And if you look at publishers, they all need basically the same technology. You all need a content management system to create your content and distribute. You need analytics to understand the impact. You need a customer relationship manager to be able to have a dialogue with subscribers or just logged in. You need probably to have paywall mechanisms. You need to have email builder and a mailer to send things. But those are the basics, right? The PDF readers, this kind of stuff, right? Everyone needs the same. Everyone is asking for money for the exact same thing. That is crazy. And I didn't do the exact math, right? But I would say that as part of the 500 million, maybe 150 or 200 went for the exact same thing. So I know people will always tell me, but we need something a bit different, we need to tweak it. Look, there was a big lie. It was to say to every news organization that they have to become a tech company. I'm not doing that. I think that journalists should have an entrepreneurial and tech mindset, but I don't think you can, as a publisher, always be a tech company. If you are Le Monde, if you are the New York Times, of course, you can be a tech company and you have to be a tech company, but you can afford that. If you are a medium-sized newsroom, I'm sorry, and that's the second learning, the competition will never be in tech. You don't have enough money to afford the good engineer, you don't have the mindset. The competition should be in the newsroom with your journalism. And I strongly believe that. So that was one of my learning at Google, and I will go back to that. Well, you all know this sentence, but culture is everything, right? So if you don't inject a culture of breaking the silos, I would say. You always say, think out of the box, or you always say self-disruption or this kind of stuff. I think the more important, especially in newsroom, is breaking the silos. I see too often still journalists working with journalists and they don't want to discuss with product. And a salesperson or the subscription manager that will work on his silo. But come on, the one that is selling subscription is the one that is talking to the audience. And the journalist will not talk to this guy. So the audience is always the elephant in the room. That should be at the center. So breaking the silo is probably the best way to create some new dynamics in newsroom. And I know it's not always the same. There are a lot of shade of grays, right? But you still see that a lot. I think journalists... Say again? Well, it's becoming so common that it is common language, right? So I can pray that I said it, but that's not true. No, that should be from any kind of American business school. You think it's coming from Europe? I don't think so. Okay. Anyway. Oh, so again?
Definitely come from someone who understands culture.
So Europe, exactly.
That's my point.
Well, I think we can do a thesis and a long debate about that, right? So let's park it. But that is me. So I wrote that. I wrote the foreword of this entrepreneurial journalism playbook. And what I said here is the importance of figure out ways as journalists, as publisher, to earn some money and to, more important, diversify your business model. Super easy to say, I'm a board member of, and an executive board member of a newspaper in the Middle East. We are not fully sustainable, we are still losing money, so I know how it is complicated, and luckily we have fantastic shareholders to support, but we are figuring out new recipes to find paths for sustainability, and that's the most important, and that goes through diversification. Why do I say that? I think earning money is the only way to secure the integrity of newsrooms. We've seen that too often. Look, for example, the fact-checking. Fact-checking has been funded at scale over the last 10 years by big techs, basically. So no big tech money will stop doing fact-checking? Come on, this is crazy. So you cannot be just donor dependent. You cannot be just your shareholder or state dependent. It's terrible. The only thing you can depend of is your readers. So they should be in the room. And I'm a strong believer in that. So you asked me to touch on AI. I'm not going to be say too much about the potential of AI. Are you all using AI? As a person? Personally, okay. Are you using AI in newsroom? Okay. So that's the interesting thing, right? You are all using AI. You do it at personal level, but many times when it's about work, let's not use that. It's bad tool. That's crazy. Come on. So you should definitely use AI.
It's not true. Statistics suggest that 50% use already use AI in many different forms, you know.
In your newsroom?
No. Statistics suggest that
Worldwide? I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that. But anyway, I'm a bit provocative here. It's just to say that something that everyone is using, no matter, I'm not saying that it should be everywhere, but of course, you should try it, and you should make sure that you understand enough to do some pedagogic stuff, because the first role of a journalist is to explain how it works, basically, to the people, and to be transparent, and to do some myth-busting around AI. And I think there is way too much confusion between when we talk about AI, we put everything in there, but we are talking mostly about generative AI, because AI exists for years, right? So make the difference between generative AI and all the AI solution. I love this chart, right? It really shows how we started talking about AI a lot in the 60s. You had the first bubble end of the 80s, and we are back to the other AI bubble that is, of course, booming. In the 70s, one of the most famous computer scientists said that within 8 years, the machine will have the general intelligence of a human. It didn't happen yet. Everyone is saying that it will happen very soon. I think they are more pitching their business here, right? Maybe that will happen, maybe not. We are all bad at prediction, and that's not the work of a journalist again, right? So let them build their business, and let's use what we have in order to understand how it works. But of course, there is an hype around AI. When you see the number of companies working on verification, on code, on video, on image, I mean, it's just crazy, right? So the bubble will explode at some point. I want to give time for questions. But anyway, I think, so is it 50%, is it 60, is it 40? I don't know. But how it's used. So why do news organizations start adopting AI? Market pressure, technological advancement, and hope. Again, back to the iPad. There is a hope. How is AI applied? Mainly around, let's say, workflow, productivities. The most I'm interested in is a business intelligence feature. And when you see a mix, and it's just starting, between business intelligence, like dynamic payrolls, this kind of stuff, with generative AI, automatic generation of leads and this kind of stuff, that will be probably an interesting game changer. In terms of workflow, there is an illusion, because you gain time, but there are a lot of mistakes, and I'm not just talking about hallucination. Checking the mistake then even more time, so you need to make a right use of AI, or again, you are at risk of destroying the trust. So I love saying that AI is definitely intelligent, but it's not smart. and we should be the smart guys in the room, and girls, of course. Talking quickly about regulation. So again, we are seeking for something that will save us. So AI, new subsidies. Let's go to the tech company and ask for money because they are. So look, I'll be clear here. I think AI has been a game changer in the relationship between the industry and the tech company and the platform. I disagree with the idea that Google killed publishers' business because Google was giving you some traffic. We were not good at monetizing it. We didn't figure out the way at the beginning. It's mostly our problem. They have a responsibility, but we are responsible as well. With AI, it's completely different. They are destroying what I call the knowledge economy, and they keep everyone in their platform. This is terribly bad. Maybe for news publisher, it's not that much of a big deal because if you are doing very good expertise journalism, you will find your niche and your audience, but for the public in general, for democracy, it's very bad. So it's another story. Some are suing those tech companies and platforms. Others, like Le Monde in France or AP or even AFP did that now, and they are making and signing deals with platforms. Of course, you don't know anything about this deal. You don't know how much money. And the main problem is that those kind of platforms, if they have 3 to 5 deals in each country, one with a big news agency, one with the main general mainstream newspaper, one with 1 or 2 specialized in finance, economic, and fashion, let's say, they can cover everything for 99% of the people, so it's terrible. Anyway. What I see at the moment that I find interesting in the industry is use of AI, sure. It supercharged speed, scale, relevance, but humans should stay in the loop. The real challenge to news brands with the rise of creators. Today there are more content creators, and including news content creators, to the creator economy, than full-time employee in the content industry overall, so it's crazy. Of course, the business model, so subscription remain very important, but I think there is a comeback with, so all the opportunity to diversify your model from events to B2B and this kind of stuff, and probably a comeback of advertising with direct sales mechanism, and not about traffic, but about the quality of the audience you're engaging. So let's forget traffic, let's forget page view, focus on quality. And in terms of leadership, of course, a need of agility, transparency, and mission-driven culture that is very often lacking. One word about the product we are doing now. Our vision, I tried during 8 years to encourage Google to create a CMS. I completely failed, so I decided to put my own money in a CMS company. Our company is based in Beirut, Lebanon. I know it's crazy to go from Google to Lebanon, but it's beautiful. So we have a team of engineers in Beirut, and the company is also in Amsterdam, right, in Europe. So we have a European branch. And I basically created the tool I was dreaming of as a journalist. I've always seen journalists hating their CMS. So I wanted to design something by journalists, for journalists, and also to tackle the issue I mentioned at the beginning about tech. So basically today, even when you think it's for free because you are using a WordPress, on top of it, you're going to use MailChimp, and you're going to use your analytics system, and you're going to have your CRM, and so forth and so on. So at the end of the day, it costs a lot, and it's not especially customized for press. So we designed something that is covering everything from paywall, all the granularity of readers' revenue model. You have the CRM, you have the analytics, you have e-readers, you have all the things you need, especially designed for news publishers. And we have a layer of AI that is used as an assistant across the board to do whatever you want, suggestion of title, keywords, summary, translation, video editing, this kind of stuff. That's what we do. If you want more information, be in touch. I think I'll stop here because we are already almost on time, and I want to give a bit of time to the audience for questions. Here you can use that. You have my name, you have my contact. I'm happy to be in touch. Questions? You have another? You do the same?
Thank you. Hey, Nadia. Well, thank you for this presentation. It has been quite an honor to have you here. The question is, you said that the readers should be in the spotlight because this is basically who we are addressing. The question is, how can you balance both the fact-checking and investigative journalism when you actually pressed somehow to deliver goods and attract readers in no times, since you have clicks or bait clicks, if you like, which poses a great threat to objectivity and maybe producing original content. So these are just contrasting issues. Thank you.
Sure, I can use that so it's easier. So I think you understood that. I'm basically against clickbait, and I think betting just on traffic was something totally crazy in the industry. So it doesn't serve the public information issue, right? But I think it's absolutely necessary to slow down and produce quality content because that's the only thing people will be willing to pay. So maybe you have less traffic, less audience, but you have qualitative audience, right?
You need to share that with the employers.
That's what I'm trying to do. So make me meet your CEO. I'm happy to have the conversation.
Well, if you pay for a job, yeah, why not?
If I pay for?
If you pay for a job, yes, why not?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. You talked about a prescription model working. Working, that's a model that is still working. That's what you said, right? The prescription model still works. Subscription, yeah.
Subscription.
Did I say prescription? Sorry, it's the, I'm a health journalist, so yeah, sorry. So the subscription model. But does that work for every country? I mean, it works for bigger ones, especially countries that have a language that is used in other countries. But in Greece, for example, or like a smaller population, the subscription model does it work in countries like ours, and especially when you don't have a culture of subscription? Greeks prefer it free. So yeah, thank you.
You're absolutely right. So it's completely different depending on the region, and we are doing a lot with my tech company in the Middle East and the Gulf. Most of the people want to consume for free. There are very few and very little readers revenue model. We set up with Lorient Lojo in Lebanon one of the first readers revenue model in the region. We did that because the product was, when I talk about product, I mean the journalistic product. The editorial value proposition was really original. We don't have massive audience, but we have very loyal subscribers. But to your point, we all know that free doesn't exist, right? If it's free, it means you are the product. So at some point, it's also about culture, it's about education, it's about finding the models. I remember in 2010, we created a consortium with publishers in France. And the purpose was to discuss with Google, by the way. And we had this consortium, and of course, we wanted, like everyone, to kind of create a Spotify of the press. Why did it fail?
It just failed because we were discussing first the sharing mechanism between publishers. So the worst enemy of a publisher is probably the next publishing house next door, and probably not the big techs or someone. So I'm provocative again here, but we need to be creative together. We need to have joint initiative in order to tackle this kind of thing. Should it be through micropayment? It works in some country. You can see in Africa some mobile micropayment, or should it be about B2B extension or this kind of stuff? Yeah, I don't know. Creativity. Yeah. It's easy to easy to pitch recipes, right? So I'm not saying that I have the silver bullet, but I try myself to reinvent on a day-to-day basis.
As you said, in the last 10 years, the publishing houses had to come to some agreement or cooperation with the big tech like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all of those. Now a new trend, except of social media that is always leading viewers and readership to the traditional media, is the AI. I mean, I heard from a friend working in a big publishing house in Greece that now they are trying to be included in the AI search results, their articles, and get traffic from that. What is your opinion about this new phenomenon?
Look, it's very hard to give a common answer to that, right? I think by default, it's always better to appear somewhere, right? But just appearing is not enough, right? So the real question behind is it your interest depending on your positioning? And more important, if you appear, how much attractive will you be, so you make sure that people are coming to your website or your app or subscribe to your newsletter, right? So just saying I should appear, it's like I just need to have traffic. Doesn't mean much.
I ask you this because a lot of work was done many news outlets and websites just to appear on Google, on the algorithm, just to appear on Google and Facebook, so we get more traffic, more visibility. Now there is a new race for the AI
of course.
Tools and
I remember a period where on one end you were using SEOs agencies and you were paying for traffic. That was mainly done by bots, but anyway, you were paying for traffic, and on the other end, you were asking platforms and Google to pay you because that's crazy. Yeah. So I don't know.
That's how it's in Greece.
You are still paying traffic? Send them my way. I mean, it will cost them less, and maybe they can work deeply in their editorial value proposition.
Traffic, it's views, and it's the main percent of all the outlets in Greece, all of them.
Okay.
Finding the recipe for Google to kind of increase the...
So it's a different reality. A different reality now.
No.
What we
I know the reality. I think they should change reality because it's a success. It's the way to fail, right?
You should speak about those.
Give them my contact. I cannot do more. I'm very happy to do that.
To echo a bit of that, the thing is that...
I cannot hear you, sorry.
Yes, to echo a bit of all previous questions, there are two things. Most employers, when talking about AI, are thinking of reducing costs. When journalists speaking about AI, they are talking about new tools. So the balance must be found somewhere there.
You said it, the balance should be found. Now look, my view here, I think the only one that succeeded in a reader's revenue model, no matter if it's a mainstream player or a B2B player, is the one that kept investing into journalism and expertise, right? No question. So AI will help in some way because it will do some tasks that are low added value, okay? But if the CEO thinks that this is just to remove job, I completely disagree with that. It should be to hire people with way more expertise and probably better salaries. That said, it's easy to say it's CEO's fault and the CEO say it's a journalist's fault, right? Let's be honest. Not everything that is produced on a day-to-day basis worth being sold, right? So we have to be tough with ourselves as journalists, and I still consider myself as a journalist, to do stuff that have value. I know it's difficult under pressure, sometimes it's impossible, but we didn't choose to do this work to just summarize some news wires or do immediate information. We want to be on the front line, we want to be on the ground, we want to do investigative stuff, original stories, right? So, yeah.
Okay, wait, just wait. We have a question here.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, my name is Akadimias. I would like to return to the subscription model that you mentioned a bit earlier. And I would like to ask, how can we expect the readers or the audience to pay for a subscription, especially, and I'm referring especially to Greece and not internationally, since credibility of the media in Greece is very low and we have been ranking very low in the annual RSF index. And just the day before yesterday, on Sunday, there was a very bad incident in the International Thessaloniki Exposition with the Prime Minister's press conference not giving any podium to some of the media outlets that are not supporting the government this moment. Personally, as a journalist and as a former journalist in one of the project partners behind you, I am not willing to pay for any subscription in any, at least in Greece, in any Greek media outlet. Perhaps I would be willing to do so for international ones that are more credible or not. But paying for money doesn't correlate directly to how credible a media news outlet is and to the freedom of press in any country, and to what extent these are not given priority. Thank you very much.
So look, first, I'm not enough of an expert about the Greek ecosystem, so I don't want to be too specific here, but I would say that you might have room to create your own stuff, right? And that's the only answer. Okay, I know it's always a chicken and eggs issue. You know the story of Denikem in Slovakia? So Denikem has been created by a group of journalists that left their newsroom after it's been bought by a media mogul, and they decided to create something. It was 10 years ago. They have a super powerful readers' revenue model. They do fantastic journalism. It's a success story. There are not that many, but it's possible. And we are talking about Slovakia here, right? So a small country. Have a look.
Thank you.
And there are also stories.
We don't have any more time for the questions, I'm afraid. We should...
Amir, come. We can discuss.
On the break, you can have more questions, okay? So let's welcome the President of the Journalists Union, Maria Doniadou, to say a few words and introduce you, Cheryl, because you are up next.
Thank you very much, President.
You.
Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for all.
Το κλείσουμε αυτό. Ναι. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, καλησπέρα σας. Ήρθα για να ευχαριστήσω, παρουσία όλων σας, συγκεκριμένους ανθρώπους, να ευχαριστήσω τον κύριο Μουρλά. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ την κυρία Σωτηράκου, που μας δώσαν την ευκαιρία και τη δυνατότητα να συνεργαστεί το Μορφωτικό Ίδρυμα της ΕΣΗΕΑ, είμαι εδώ εκ μέρους του Μορφωτικού Ιδρύματος, με το ΕΚΠΑ. Είναι το πρώτο. Το δεύτερο, που μας έδωσαν τη χαρά να φιλοξενήσουμε ένα τέτοιο είδους συνέδριο και σεμινάριο που απευθύνεται σε όλους μας. Το τρίτο, έχουν ταξιδέψει από την Ευρώπη και την Αμερική καθηγητές πανεπιστημίου από πολύ μεγάλα πανεπιστήμια. Είναι η πρώτη φορά που συμμετέχουν σε σεμινάριο του ΕΚΠΑ τόσο σημαντικές προσωπικότητες του σχετικού τμήματος του εργαστηρίου και βεβαίως σε σεμινάριο και του Μορφωτικού Ιδρύματος της ΕΣΗΑ. Είχαμε χρόνια, πάνω από 25 χρόνια, να έχουμε κοντά μας έναν άνθρωπο που βραβεύεται με βραβείο Πούλιτζερ. Ο προηγούμενος πήρε και το Νόμπελ Ειρήνης προσφάτως. Παρακαλώ πάρα πολύ, για μένα είναι πάρα πολύ μεγάλη τιμή, πιστεύω για όλους σας, ότι σήμερα ανάμεσά μας έχουμε αυτή την κυρία που το 2025 πήρε το βραβείο Πούλιτζερ. Χθες το πρωί είχα την τιμή να την ξεναγήσω μαζί με τους άλλους καθηγητές εδώ στη βιβλιοθήκη μας και είδα έναν απόλυτα σεμνό και ταπεινό άνθρωπο. Ρώτησα μεταξύ των ανθρώπων που ξεναγήσαμε ποια είναι η κυρία που πήρε το Πούλιτζερ και ήταν η κυρία που βλέπετε και ήταν τελευταία και περίμενε τη σειρά της για να ξεναγηθεί. Η ταπεινότητα σε τέτοιους ανθρώπους δεν είναι αναμενόμενη σε άλλες χώρες. Την ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Ευχαριστώ για την ευκαιρία που δίνει στα μέλη της Ένωσής μας. Την ευχαριστώ που εντυπωσιάστηκε από τη βιβλιοθήκη μας. Και πάλι ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, συνάδελφοι, που είσαστε εδώ ανάμεσά μας.
Thank you very much. I was very impressed by the library, so that was incredible.
So we have Cheryl Phillips with us. She's a professor at Stanford, and we have a lot of things that we can say for you about the local news initiative and the Computational Journalism Lab and everything. But I think you will, say more things, and in a better way you will explain. So I will give you the floor. Thank you for being with us.
You bet. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I have on the screen here what our site looks like when you come to it brand new, just so that you can see that, because I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at Big Local News, which is an organization I run out of Stanford, and it's designed to support local journalism everywhere. And we provide tools and data and what we call reporting recipes, basically tutorials and training for how to use data for stories. When you first come to the site, you basically are prompted to sign up. And then once you have signed up, anytime you come back to the site, you just can log in or you'll just stay logged in. And so I just wanted to show you what it looks like when you first come to it. Then when you come back to it, it will look like this, which is a series of projects right now sorted alphabetically. We'll be changing that so that they'll be sorted by recency. And basically each one of these projects are a data-driven journalism project that either we collected the data or a news organization collected the data, put it into our platform, and made it available for anybody else to do stories out of that data. The idea is to amplify impact beyond your one single news organization and to take advantage of the data that other news organizations or other organizations, just period, can share out. So that's what I'm going to be talking about a little bit, about some of the ways that you can share information to increase the impact that you have as a journalist, and talk about the types of collaborations that we've seen success with that kind of follow along this path. So, but I did want to start with at least kind of showing you our platform. You'll notice that one of the projects I have up here is called Brain Waste Among European Immigrants. if I were to, this is like a cooking show, you know, where they put the chicken in the oven and then all of a sudden it's done. I'm just going to click over to the next tab and all of a sudden my project is open. And so this was a project that was put together by Lighthouse Reports on brain waste, basically skilled immigrants not being able to get jobs, you know, when they go to other countries. And so they put together a kind of a file that explained what the data was about and then how to use the data. And we also published this whole tutorial on how to use the data. That's the kind of thing that you can find at the platform. So I just wanted to be able to start by showing you that. And then I'm going to walk through a little bit how we use our platform and how we collaborate with others to be able to kind of scale up journalism for local newsrooms in particular. So now I'll go ahead and go to my presentation and show you a little bit more in depth. So Big Local News is a platform, again, at Stanford, and it's built for us for you to be able to share data, collaborate on projects. We collect local data ourselves. We also partner with news organizations to help them collect data, and we create collaborations and stories, and the goal, again, is to yield impact. So this is just an example of kind of some of the reporting recipes that we've published and put out as well. It just kind of walks folks right through things, right? You know, kind of how to tell the story out of the data. Our belief is that if you collaborate in news, you will have impact. And we're all about creating impact as journalists. And so I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the types of collaborations that we have seen and have participated in. I am at a university, so of course going from academia to journalists is one type of collaboration, and so I'm going to talk about a couple of collaborations that we've done at Stanford that I think are examples of that. Another type of collaboration is going from a national news site and then disseminating data and tutorials out to local newsrooms, which is a very common way that we see collaborations done. And then one of the most recent ones, which I think is a little more unique and has a lot of potential, is going from a local outlet to other local outlets, and then finding that national story out of these local stories so that you end up with a national partner as well. And I really like this model because I think you can have even more impact, even more scale, but at that very local level, which is sometimes where change happens most easily. So I'm going to walk through some examples of this. And I'll just preface it by saying that none of this works without shared understanding. Collaboration is not easy. Working in a newsroom, a single newsroom, is not easy. Imagine working across multiple newsrooms. It's much harder, but it's worth it. So phase one for us is always an agreement on how we're going to share data and metadata. How do we organize and extract data at scale? That's in particular for big local news, but just how you're going to organize the information inside the newsroom is part of it as well. And how do we help the journalists and the public find data that they can then use for that kind of understanding? And I want to digress for a minute to just say that you have to also allow for serendipity. Stories, as you know, come up in all kinds of ways. Somebody calls with a tip, or you might overhear a conversation at a cafe, or somebody hands you a document that all of a sudden has a smoking gun hidden inside of it. During the pandemic, I got a dog, and I started walking my dog to the local dog park, which was actually a school that had been shut down. And I met another guy because his dog liked my dog, and they played together. And so he ended up being a professor at Stanford also in the Graduate School of Education. So we had a conversation that went something like, I do data journalism, and he said, oh, well, I do data and education. And I had just gotten funding from the Google News Initiative to support COVID-related data-driven stories for local newsrooms. So I came back to him and said, hey, you said you do data and education, and I'm trying to do something with data and COVID and education for newsrooms. Why don't we collaborate? And it was all because our dogs liked each other. So there we go. So just, expect and embrace serendipity. That was a complete happenstance, and now we have a regular collaboration, and we've worked together a lot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that particular collaboration as an example of how you can do really great work when you leverage the power of a university with the power of journalism. So this story ended up, what the professor, Tom D. and I did was, he said, if you really want to measure the impact of the COVID pandemic, you need to figure out school enrollment. School enrollment in the U.S., the data is really hard to come by in a timely manner. The federal government is about a year lag on school enrollment data, and now it's impossible to get anyway. So we went state by state and sometimes school district by school district, down to the very local level to get the data on how many students were enrolled, down to the grade, down to the school. I mean, it took us a long time. It probably took us about at least 4 months to get all of the data that we needed for 33 states. There were some states we just could not get. We scraped the data, we put in public records requests, we negotiated with school officials, we told them what we were trying to do, we were very upfront about it, and we managed to get some really robust data. So that level of scale, even the New York Times didn't have the bandwidth to go collect that data. They were having a hard enough time just collecting data on COVID cases, much less school enrollment. And so they really relied on us, and we worked with not just the journalists on my staff, but also with students. So it's a perfect example of where you can engage students in the process of learning how to do journalism, learning how to put in public records requests, how to negotiate for this information, how to then do things with that. And the really exciting part for them was that all of the students who worked on the project ended up being named in the credits for this New York Times article. So think about being a college student and being then named in a New York Times article. Not a bad clip for your resume. So we were then able to leverage the kind of statistical capabilities of the education professor, Tom D., and his PhD students to do some very sophisticated analysis of what these school enrollment trends meant. And data journalists are great. I mean, I think that we can do very sophisticated work, but it's also really nice to have somebody who's a domain expert in that field to do very sophisticated statistical analysis and say, hey, let's work together on this. And so that really helped level up the story. We ended up with a story in the New York Times, a story in a California news organization called EdSource, an academic paper I'll just start this up. An academic paper, we released all of the data down to the school, and a reporting recipe and an interactive tutorial, which you can still find on YouTube. And we saw impact right away. So we released, and when I say we released all of this, we released it all on the same day. So on one day, we provided the data, the New York Times story, the EdSource story, a tutorial, and basically said to the world, hey, this is important, you can do this story, you can take a look at this data for your state, for your one community. How is your community leveling up? Are you missing students? The finding was that there were lots and lots of kindergarten, 5-year-olds who were just gone. They just disappeared out of the schools. And so how were they being educated? And were there gaps, especially when it came to like poverty and things like that? Were they still being educated? So 2 weeks later, there's a newspaper in Baltimore, Maryland, the Baltimore Sun, did this story in which they said that it was an investigation. It says an analysis of data by the Baltimore Sun and Big Local News shows that the state lost 27,000 children. I never talked to them, never spoke to them. They went through our reporting recipe, were able to find the numbers using that recipe, using that tutorial, and then they just reported out their story. which is perfect. That's like the best possible outcome for us. You know, I loved that they gave us credit too, but you know, the fact that they were able to do that story without calling us up, like they could just go do the story because we gave them the tools to do it. This project won some awards for top 10 collaborations. It was a nonprofit news award, and that's all well and good. One of the other impacts that came from it was, and I count this as an impact, a year later, we did a second story with the Associated Press, and we did a whole nother round looking at where the missing kids, if they ever showed back up in school, kind of post-closures. And we found that many, hundreds of, you know, I think it was 100,000 plus students, they'd just gone missing. They never showed back up in schools. And this project happened because the New York Times passed on a follow-up. They were busy. They're like, we've done it, we're good. And the Associated Press said, okay, well, we'd like to look at this. And we think we can take it farther. And so we worked with the Associated Press, and then we partnered again with the same education professor, and we did webinars for all of the Associated Press member newsrooms. So all these local newsrooms joined in on the same call, and we released the findings, and the professor, Tom D., was right there so that every local newsroom could ask him for a quote for their particular findings on this call. So they got a national expert at the same time that they learned how to use the data to find their own story. So it worked out really well. And they ended up, in fact, one of the, there were 230,000 students in 21 states whose absences could not be accounted for, just completely disappeared. And this was a year ago, so it's like well after the pandemic had kind of stopped having that kind of impact on schools. And they ended up, some of the students that they had written about ended up going back to school. And so they covered that. And this story won some national awards, and it was also a Pulitzer finalist. So that's kind of an example of how you can leverage the power of academia. I don't think a single newsroom could have done this story. And, you know, our role at Big Local was we certainly fostered the stories, but we just tried to make it possible for the reporters to go do the work that they wanted to do. So making the data available to them, helping them get with the findings that they needed to get. And I think that's really important. So, funding for this kind of work is key. We started with money from the Google News Initiative, and then also with money from the Brown Institute for Media Innovation, which is at Columbia and at Stanford. But it's not everything. The Associated Press project happened just because we felt like we needed to do it. And we partnered, the Associated Press leveled up. They said, we'll put in these number of reporters and these data journalists if you can put in these folks, you know, your folks, 2 people or whatever, and, you know, maybe some students. And so you can find a way, if you can figure out enough with the collaboration that everybody's putting in a little, it's really doable. Another project that married academia and journalism is a tool called Data Talk that uses generative AI. It's an open source agent, and we used it during the election. Also, we had gotten funding from the Brown Institute for this, and we basically built this framework for exploratory data analysis that you get to by just asking natural language questions. So the way the tool works is you log in and you just say something like, give me the top congressional candidates in Maine who made the most out-of-state contributions. The agent says, I'm thinking. And then it comes back with this code, which is structured query language. And for those of you who don't know structured query language, it explains it for you. And then it gives you a more technical explanation as well. And it gives you the answer. And it gives you a link so that you can open up the code and fact check it in real time, right up against the data tables, so that it's easy to check the truth, the veracity of it. And because the agent is only working on the data that has been uploaded and only on the instructions that have been uploaded, it's not going to hallucinate outside of that sphere at all. And you can check against what it's pulling from the tables. And so it makes it much easier to fact check. So this particular project was developed by a computer science professor at Stanford and her PhD students, and she needed to figure out a real life application for it. And so that's where the journalists came in, and my program came in, where we said, well, we think we can do that. And so I had my students work on election stories in partnership with local newsrooms, and we published 4 stories before the election, like around the election, about fundraising in the Bay Area, in California, in Hawaii, in Maine, different places, in Atlanta, and they were really good stories, and they were very well fact-checked, and the editors of those news organizations were really happy to have those. And then one of the kind of serendipitous moments is that we tried to put the news out about this tool, and the Maine Monitor, the small nonprofit newsroom up in Maine, said, hey, we'd like to do this. Would you kind of just help us? And so I said, sure, you go through the process and we'll help you fact check it. And they were able to turn this story around before the election, and they probably wouldn't have had time to do so otherwise. So that's another example of how we can really level up the ability of journalists. And the key here is that I don't think the Maine Monitor was going to build its own agent for how to analyze campaign finance data using the national data set that is unwieldy at best. And so it made it much easier for them to do the work that they needed to do. This is not ending. We're building a new site that allows anybody to upload any structured data set and any set of instructions. So right now we have non-emergency calls that we've uploaded into for San Francisco, and we have ACLED, which is a database of I can't remember, it's like bombings and like any kinds of disruptions at war. We've uploaded it as well. And the idea is that you'll be able to upload your own data, run your own natural language queries, share it with somebody else, and it makes it really useful. So that's another example of, again, where you can really leverage the power of the university for journalism. The other type of collaboration I wanted to talk about quickly, and I know I'm going to run out of time if I don't go quickly, but is national journalism to local. So what does that look like? USA Today did a story about nursing homes in the United States. This was during President Biden's presidency, and he had new guidelines that said, you know what, there's not enough workers in the nursing homes, people are not being cared for properly, and so we're going to increase the guidelines. You have to have higher staff levels. And so they did a story about that with kind of some horrific pictures of injuries to older folks, and they got all of the guidelines, all of the staffing levels for every single nursing home in the United States. It was a federal data set. They had to clean it up and process it and do a lot of work. And they popped it into the big local news platform. I just happened to notice, oh, look, somebody put this data in. And I knew the reporter, so I called her up and said, wouldn't you like to do a webinar with us? And so we trained local journalists. So that this is the project, and then we trained local journalists. We archived the data with the Stanford libraries and put together a reporting recipe. And there were about a dozen other stories published at very local newsrooms because rural areas are one of the areas that have a hard time with nursing home staff. And so we saw all of these stories published at small newsrooms around the United States about nursing homes that were communities that were just missing the bar in terms of the services that they were providing to the elderly in the community. And so that's a really, I think, great example of how you can take a national data set now and do something like that. What's the motivation there? For USA Today, it's a big national paper, but you know what? They love to be able to say, oh, look, our story was, like not only did the local news organization publish their own story, they referenced that national investigation every single time. USA Today loved that. They loved it when they got referenced for their big national piece. They put a lot of time and effort into it, so they liked to get that word out. And the local news organizations were happy to do that because they wouldn't have been able to do the story otherwise. So they had this shared motivation. And I think you can see that a lot when you go national to local, and that's really important. So that's just one example of kind of that that national to local. And by national, I really am thinking international. I think we see the same thing here with the Brain Waste Project. And this was the same kind of situation where the project was, where Lighthouse Reports just reached out and said, hey, we want to put this in the platform. We'd really like to do a reporting recipe. We think that we did a lot of collection of data, and we think this is really useful, and a lot of news organizations might be interested in it. So that's what we did. We just kind of helped them with the reporting recipe. We put it out there, and we made it possible for them to be able to do that. And we saw some, other stories that kind of came out of that data. This is just an example of kind of like what the reporting recipe looks like, where we just literally go, this is what the data looks like. This is how you are going to sort it and filter it. The idea of reporting recipes is that it really levels up the newsroom. It helps those who have fewer resources. If I can walk somebody through, sort it this way, filter it that way. This is how you do a pivot table. This is, here's the query you need to run so that you can get the answer that you need. And then one of the other things that we do is if a news organization is a little worried, like maybe it's the first time they've done a data project, they can reach out to us and we'll fact check for them. We'll rerun the analysis because sometimes you just want that extra security. And so that's another example of, I think, that works really well. The last one that I kind of wanted to talk about, which is my favorite, is the local to national. So what does that even mean? We partner with the New York Times. They have a investigative reporting fellowship where they basically hire local reporters from local newsrooms to work on an investigation over the course of a year. And we basically are the data journalism supports for those local fellows. And we also give those local newsrooms a bunch of extra services too. So the Baltimore Banner was one of they had two reporters, a data journalist and a kind of regular reporter, who were the fellows, essentially, and they were looking at opioid overdoses in Baltimore. And they ended up, and so their stories will be published by the New York Times. That's the way the fellowship works. But as they did their story, they realized that out of all the data that they had collected, it was CDC data on opioid. We got special data that was down to every single opioid overdose death because of an academic license. And so we had to roll it back up to the county level to be able to release it. But what they found was that it wasn't just Baltimore that had a problem. And so then we hatched this idea of we needed to go well beyond national to local and back again, but it needed to go local to local to local to local. And then that was the fuel for the national story. So the first finding was that people in Baltimore had been dying of overdoses at a rate never before seen in a major American city. Then they did that story. The Baltimore Banner published it. The New York Times published it. And, that was a really good story. It's an important story. It started to push change in Baltimore for how they were even paying attention to overdoses. And then the reporters kept doing data analysis out of this really granular data. And they discovered that there was this one generation that had been devastated. Older Black men had died at far higher rates. In fact, you can see the Black men line right there on the chart and how much higher it is. So men born from 1951 to 1970 were dying at far higher rates than anybody else, higher than white men, higher than Black women. We see a similar disparity between Black women and white women. And then we realized that this was not just a Baltimore problem. This was a problem in other major cities, but not every major city. It was industrial cities and port cities. And there were all kinds of complicated reasons as to why that was, having to do with people coming back from the Vietnam War and not being able to find jobs, and the kind of demise of industry in the United States. And so we see in the Rust Belt, in Detroit and Chicago, Baltimore, Philly, other places, and port cities where they had similar kinds of effects. So we reached out to other local newsrooms. I think we reached out to about a dozen, and I think we ended up partnering with 9. And so we found, we did this data analysis, and we came up with what we call superlative findings for every major cohort, every major city that had this cohort effect. So in San Francisco, the cohort died at nearly 30 times the national rate. In Chicago, the rate had gone up exponentially in recent years. In Washington, D.C., it had also increased very rapidly in the last 5 years and was second only to Chicago. It was also increasing faster than Baltimore's, which is just next door. And again, that main finding. And so we found, as we started looking at counties, kind of these geographic areas, that there were a dozen, that no cohort of people had died of overdose more than Black men from this age group in 12 U.S. counties. And so we ended up publishing with all of these news organizations, 6 of them on the same day, 3 of them published in January. This is what we call these comet charts, which is a completely made up term, but it looks like the tail of a comet to us. And let me see if I can go to the, I'm going to try to escape from my presentation here for a second. Let's see here, and show the actual chart, because when the New York Times published it, I love the upshot. So first they showed COVID deaths among U.S. men and how they were all kind of clustered. So this is age here, and this is the year down here, and this was deaths per 100,000. So they're talking about COVID deaths among U.S. men, and how, this struck many ages all at once. That was the pandemic. And then they talk about how some deaths strike at a certain age. Prostate cancer almost always kills men later in their lives. So we see this cluster at 80, and I'm probably running out of time. We can see the concentration for gun homicides. Now I want you to look at this. This is Chicago overdose death rates for Black men. You can see that cluster in that age. Now this is it for white men, right? So Black men, white men, same age. Like, being able to do that was incredible. And we built a scrolly telly like the New York Times for all of these local newsrooms. We gave every newsroom a graphic. We gave every newsroom the data findings. We fact-checked with every newsroom. We were all in Slack together. It was like being in one big newsroom. It was the most incredible experience I have had since I left a newsroom and came to Akademia. I mean, it was just the best. And the thing that came out of this is that it really helped us tell the stories at the very local level. And so that, then Chicago started a conversation about how they were going to change things. Baltimore's doing it. DC, the newsroom we partnered with, has a part-time staff, mostly volunteer, of about 5 people. And they were able to do a story about what was happening in DC because we helped kind of provide the structure around that. So I think that's one of the really kind of great examples about what you can do when you do this kind of partnership. So this is just, what did we ask for? Regular communication, shared reporting. We didn't require them to give us their stories. We didn't require that we would edit their stories. We asked that we could fact check the data findings. We offered support if they wanted it. We didn't say they had to publish on the same day. We gave as much, and the editors were like, wait, you're not asking to Bigfoot us? No, we're not. We just want data viz, data analysis, that gave them data that they couldn't have gotten. We coordinated it. We released the data on the same day. And the thing that this does is, it just, again, it makes it easier to create impact. With all of these types of collaborations, so from academic to journalists, it helps scale and it fosters innovation. For national journalism to local journalism, it increases impact. For local to local and then national, it supports the local and it increases impact. So all of these things are, I think, why collaboration matters and why it's worth the pain of going through it, because it's actually a lot of fun too. So I can open for questions if we have any time left. And here's my email. Please reach out. Oh, and this won a Pulitzer. I forgot to mention that. So that's also was a good thing. Yeah.
What you suggested is basically that someone really needs to spend a lot of time and resources to run a project like this. First of all, would the collaboration be possible, on a Greek level as well with you?
Sure.
Second one is data. Where should it come from? Should we provide the data? Because that's quite a hard task to get. And the third one is, what's the turnaround, the turnover, if you like, for the news organization? Because that will probably take months to complete, and the outcome may be quite questionable. So there are many different topics there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. Yeah, the turnaround time can be long depending on the ambitions, right? But they can also be shorter turnaround times. That USA Today story on nursing home guidelines was a federal data set already available. During COVID, we actually worked with about, I think, 7 newsrooms that were international and about, I think, 6 that were U.S. to do data-driven COVID-related stories. And we did it it probably took about 3 to 6 months for each newsroom. We helped them collect the data. We helped them figure out how to collect the data. Sometimes we scraped the data for them. Because not every local newsroom is going to know how to scrape data. It's getting easier with generative AI, but we try to provide those kinds of resources where we can. For one thing, it's good for the students to practice, and we can vet it. Our goal, what we try to do at Big Local News, is create the support so that the local newsroom can actually do these things that are a little more ambitious. And in terms of turnaround time depends on the story, depends on what you're trying to collect. So it just kind of depends, it relates to the story. But if Big Local News is our mandate. This is the whole reason that I created the organization, was so that we could help level up and build an infrastructure in support of local news. So you should definitely reach out. We've worked with lots of places. And one of the other projects that we did was climate finance data from the United Nations, which was in terrible shape. So we have all the loans and grants from the UN that we've standardized and normalized. And we did a couple of projects with Reuters, and we released all that data. But now an NGO has taken over the task of cleaning and processing that data, and they're releasing it every single year. So the idea is, the more we can do this, the more we can kind of help foster increasing availability of data that you can use for stories. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I should have let you do it. My bad. Sorry, Kostas.
Sorry. May I ask something about the Datatalk tool? Is it open if we want, to feed it a database so we can use it as an agent?
Yeah, so you can use it as an agent. It's sadly down at the moment because the PhD student, like the one for campaign finance is up. Here, this is it. The one that allows you to upload your own data set is down today, but will be back up probably by tomorrow. So, and that's just because the PhD student was on holiday and forgot to restart the kernel. So, this happens occasionally. So we're in the process of making it more operational so that it will really scale, because it's been in beta. But yeah, you can use it, you can upload data, and there's a tutorial for how to do it on the site. Yeah.
Okay. Cheryl, behind all the stories, the fuel of your stories is the data. Yes. What will you suggest in a Greek reality where all the media organization, even the public organization, they try to keep the data inside? They are afraid to publish, to collaborate, to exchange the data. And if they present them, they present it in a difficult way in order to scrape it or to process them.
Right, yeah. That's a challenge. It's a challenge everywhere. And even in the U.S., it's increasingly becoming a challenge. During COVID, we worked with some journalists in Peru who literally went location by location to collect on paper the number of COVID deaths. And then we turned it into data, right? We helped them enter it into a spreadsheet. We helped them make sense of it. If it's trapped in a PDF, we will help extract it. I mean, Jonathan Soma did a great tutorial on how you can do that using some tools. So I had a class work with Columbia University during one of my years teaching, where we got from the Philippines the police shootings, the different, going agency to agency, where we then extracted these photos of the records and turned that into data. So it's certainly a challenge, but I think there are ways to be able to take information and turn it into structured data that will help you find. When I think about data journalism, I think what our goal is to go beyond the anecdote. And that's what data journalism does. It helps bring evidence to the anecdote. And so sometimes that means you have to do manual collection. And if you think about it, the very first data journalism project in 1968, which was done by Philip Meyer, who was a reporter for the Knight Ridder Foundation when the Detroit race riots happened, and how he did his story in 1968 was they went out and did surveys of people who had been rioting to find out what their reasons were for rioting, and then they punched it all into a mainframe computer that they could only access at night. And that was kind of the beginning of modern data journalism. So unfortunately, too much of the world is like that still, where we have to figure out, how do we go collect this information, but can we turn it into something? And if you've ever seen the movie Spotlight, they took the records from the books and they punched it into a spreadsheet, and sometimes that's what we have to do. So, yeah, it's more of a challenge, but it's still doable.
Naturally, as a follow-up, obviously any quantification of a story into data will help turn this into some sort of a policy that makes sense. But so what is the impact of the stories that you worked on? Do you have any idea? Can you tell us the local level, national level, international level?
Well, for the overdose story, the impact has been, we've seen change in pretty much every city that has written about that one cohort. We've seen change at the local level for how the local cities, Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, DC, have been addressing the drug problem in those communities. In Baltimore, they had not even realized that it was this. Well, I think in any of these cities, they had not even realized that, it's this one group of black men. We could actually provide more services to them and get them into rehab and give them some supports. The other thing that we found was that there were also a lot of senior communities, retirement communities, low-income retirement communities, where people were dying alone and just being found. And so then they started, in Baltimore especially, they have increased the supports to these low-income retirement communities to provide more services to help the residents avoid dying of an overdose. So we've seen that, and a lot of our stories, I'm a big believer that you see more impact at the local level than you do at the national level. If I go write a big national, if the New York Times had done this story and just done the national story, maybe they would have gotten some congressional hearings, but the change happens locally in many, many of these instances. We've done a lot with policing data as well. Policing in the United States is all local. Every police agency is its own entity. So the only way you're going to see change is to cover it at the local level. And so that's why I think there's real promise there. I've seen local governments stop ticketing people for broken headlights and taillights and things because that just means you're poor. After we were able to show them that there was no statistical measure that said that increased, that doing that helps decrease crime. And that's what they were going off of. But if if you showed the police agency that that's not true, then they kind of change their methods and their disparities and discrimination rates kind of go down. And it doesn't happen. That doesn't happen at all if you don't cover it. So.
Administration come
Yeah, so internet, so like actually one of the other things that we're doing is we're pulling in every single day all of the federal contract terminations, and we'll be doing grants next if we can get our hands around that one. But the idea is I pipe it into Slack channels. I have one for every state. So so that then local news organizations can write about the impact of what's happening at the federal level on their local community. Because if I'm a local person, I may not even be zoned in to what the latest big national story is about the current administration in the United States. But I sure as heck care if it means that this company is going to lay off 150 people because they lost a contract. And it's my cousin Joe is one of those people. And so I think it's really important, again, to go to that local level. Yeah.
Well, we know that the media in all over the world are facing an economic crisis. How did you manage the economic aspect of this extensive research? Was it easy to free up money and resources?
No. But I am actually really positive, and probably maybe unrealistically so, but I think it's proving out. So we've gotten some funding from foundations which have helped us get kickstarted as a platform, as a collaborative effort inside of Stanford. And so that's helped us really increase staff and things like that. But I believe there's real value in the data that we are collecting. In fact, and it's not just based on my belief. I have organizations who have become members, what we call Data Plus members of Big Local News, because we give them access to the data that we've collected. And then we turn that money around and help us support the journalists. And I also have news organizations because we're giving them these Slack notifications for layoffs and problematic fiscal audits and the contract terminations and deaths in the workplace, all kinds of things. We're kind of creating these streaming news alerts. And so I have news organizations paying kind of a subscription, a membership fee, and we give them extra services to help them, extra training, extra mentorship. And so that also then helps us support everybody. So once we do the training for one organization, they get it first, but then we turn it around and make it available to everybody. So I think there's real possibility for creating a system that will allow us to continue to support local news. And I actually think, excuse me, there's a possibility for local news organizations collecting data, funneling it into this big repository that we have, and then us paying those local news organizations for collecting that data, because we'll get paid by somebody else. And so then that helps the bottom line of the local news organization as well. And that part is still a pipe dream, but I believe that that's possible. So it's something I'm going to be testing out.
What I wanted to ask you is, let's say we manage to collect the data, which sometimes is not easy at all, in Greece, in the United States, anywhere in the world. How do you manage to find the pattern and deliver the story and not get lost in this data? And can AI also help in that, your platform?
Well, we do use a lot of generative AI tools and large language models and a whole variety of things. I guess AI can help some with that. I also think, we teach an entire master's program on how to find patterns and disparities and anomalies in data. And so learning how to do data journalism is critical. One of the things that we do is every quarter we have open office hours. So if somebody has just a story idea and they want to talk it over with us, we can help them get started to say, like, okay, well, here's how you want to go about collecting the data. Well, here's how you want to start analyzing the data. Here's what you want to look for, because it does differ from project to project. And then there are some kind of constants, but we can help with that. And, I probably shouldn't go into great detail here, but I'm happy to talk to you more about it. Yeah.
Somebody's earbuds.
1-2, 1-2.
3-4.
Και 3.
Σε 1 λεπτό ξεκινάμε. Παρακαλώ πολύ καθίστε. Θάνο, κλείνουμε την πόρτα.
Πού? Έχουμε. Έλα ρε. Να ξεκινήσουμε. Hello, welcome. I'd like to welcome all of you and to welcome on behalf of the Federation of Journalistic Unions of Greece, of the Union of the Unions. This is the Federation, the Union of the Unions. I'd like to welcome all of you, to congratulate you, Mrs. Sotirakou, Mr. Mourlas, all of you for the organizers of this innovative summer school. We have the honor to host it here in the Union of Athens. Here is the Union of Athens, the oldest and the most historic union of Greece, founded 1914. One of the first unions which was founded around the world, and one of the unions which established the International Federation of Journalists, which is very old. And the union, the federation and the union, and all the unions, the members of the federation, we are the first journalistic union in Greece, in the world, sorry. We made a code of ethics for the use of AI for the journalists. I'll give you after your lecture the code. So I'd like to welcome you. I'd like to present to all of you Mrs. Elena Gabral. We have the honor to have Mrs. Gabral with us from the school, the School of Journalism of the Columbia University of New York. I'm sure that we will attend an interesting lecture. Thank you very much again. You are here with us. I welcome you on behalf of all the journalists of Greece. Okay, a great honor for us. You are all of you here. Ms. Sotirakou, thank you again, and for the cooperation for everything. And we can start. The floor is yours. Thank you.
And the school, thank you so much to Katerina and Kostas for being such wonderful colleagues and to have put this together so amazingly well. I just keep wanting to hug Katerina because every event she does is just very successful and brings together people. We were talking about this last night with wonderful energy. I really enjoy more than anything being around journalists because as I discovered when I attended Columbia Journalism myself in the mid-1990s, late 1990s, was that, you know, I had worked in various types of companies and cultures and environments, and I realized these are my people. They're smart, they're engaged, they're funny, they care, they understand, and they really care about their communities, and they care about the truth. So thank you for letting me be among you and remembering why I feel so passionately about journalism. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and moved to New York City when I was 18 to go to college, and really loved to write. I worked for the Ford Foundation for many years, traveling all over the world, writing about incredible people who were changing the world, but realizing that in my sort of communications role there, I was spreading a message to people who are good people, but who already know and understand this work, and that if I really wanted to make an impact in the world, I needed to be in a news organization, in this subculture of people with our own set of rules about how to do things correctly and with fairness and dispassion, or dispassionately, meaning without our own, set of biases. And so I went to journalism school, graduated from Columbia, went on to work first for Newsday, which was a great local newspaper in New York, to the Miami Herald, another really wonderful local news organization that, because of its proximity, because of its location, we found that a lot of the stories that we worked on had international attention. Am I standing too close to this? Okay. And so I feel a little bit inadequate, and keep holding on to Katerina's hand to be around data journalists, digital masters of this craft that does magical things with data and computational science, when I am essentially just a street reporter, someone who uses what we call shoe leather reporting, knocking on doors and things like that, but has learned a great deal in that and discovered that as a teacher, I can help students understand how important local journalism is, and for them to get away from their computers and take that subway ride to Harlem or the Bronx or many of our other communities to sort of understand local issues. Without local journalism, there really is no national or international journalism that has any real true meaning to it. My editor, Linda Streifeld, at the Herald used to tell us hyper-local reporters, like we were just covering individual neighborhoods. She said, when you, in my experience, when you write national, or, international stories as a foreign correspondent, they're great, but then the next day they're sort of like forgotten, and you're only as good as the story that you're doing next, right? That's sort of the environment that we live in. But in local journalism, when you write something, it touches people very personally. whether it's a hurricane or a school closing or a new principal or a police shooting, it matters very, very personally. And so when people see that article, they don't just toss it, they cut it out and they put it on the top of their refrigerator door. So she said to us, you know, I want you to aspire to be on the top of that refrigerator. And at first I was kind of like, what? And then I realized, oh, the more people recognized my name, the more they reached out and told me things. And when I would write a story, it would have just a very immediate impact, you know, and response. And even though I had no real connection personally to Florida, to South Florida, I felt a huge amount of ownership of making sure that what happened in these communities is understood very clearly, that voters, for example, could understand how their local elected officials were fundraising. So you could ask for public records related to their donations, go right through them and explain, you know, how certain companies were making donations, and then the next day there would be, you know, a big grant given to them to build a community center or something. And I remember local politicians would call me up very angry and say, you know, it must be a slow news day because that's not news. And you know what else? It's not illegal, you know, to sort of accept these donations and then, you know, have relationships with these folks. And I said to the editor, when I finally got the courage to be someone who had a sense of ownership, you're right, Mayor, it's not illegal, but it doesn't make it right. And local voters have the right to know how politics works. And I remember those words coming out of my mouth and thinking, oh, wow, you know, it's amazing how much you can develop and grow as a local journalist. There were communities like Weston, this community in South Florida called Weston that was really gated. It was very hard to get in and talk to communities. I used to spy on them, talking in local listservs. But then social media came along, and it made it so much easier for me to infiltrate communities. The more social media developed, the more tools sprouted up that allowed us as journalists to access people and conflicts. I think, you know, the richer the experience of reporting became. So I teach this class to my students, but also because I am currently the assistant dean for international programs, to students who are learning reporting for the very first time. And so they don't generally use a lot of these tools. They have social media accounts, but they don't use them as a reporting tool. Can I ask by you guys with this show of hands, how many of you have a social media account, be it Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, that you use professionally? A social media account that you use professionally that has a bio that is, okay, great. Well, every year, you know, there's always a lot of analysis about social media, certainly, and I generally try to look, when I do this lesson, at how organizations like MuckRec are looking at how we use them, and the data is pretty interesting. As of 2025, the MuckRec survey of 1,000 journalists around the world showed that Twitter's actually sort of fallen in favor, which may not be a surprise since the Musk takeover, but now, you know, now 27%, the highest portion of journalists find that Facebook is most useful to them as a journalist. As a 54-year-old uncool mom, I'm very happy to see that. Then followed by LinkedIn, followed by Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Blue Sky, Reddit, YouTube. Oh, and there's TikTok. Very low on the totem pole, but I have a very strong argument for TikTok in a moment. The most popular social networks worldwide as of February 2025, according to Statista, is Facebook. With over 3 billion users, followed by YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp, TikTok, WeChat, Telegram, et cetera, et cetera. I tried Snapchat, and then my daughter's friends started trying to friend me, and she just banned me from it, so I don't use that one anymore. The Reuters Institute just does some incredible analysis of international trends and does it by country. And it noted, quote, social media continues to be used by most Greeks online to get news, 64% overall, followed by YouTube, 30%, Instagram, and TikTok, 70%, are now increasingly used for news, particularly among younger audiences. It also found that the top social messaging and video networks, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, only 26% share news via social messages. So the practice of, just kind of sending something to your students. Oh, yes. Oh. Explain to us this is your source. Oh, the Reuters Institute does what's called a digital news report. Okay. It's a wonderful thing. It's very easy to download, and it gives you a very good snapshot of countries everywhere and their. In fact, sorry, what was the answer? It's the usage. The usage. Mm-hmm. The usage, okay. By journalists. People. Oh, yeah, by just users. Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Very easy to find. Digital News Report, Reuters Institute. Do it with Oxford. Here are some Greek journalists. I like to show these to my students because they generally have to clean up their Twitter accounts. They come to us from college a lot of the time. They come to us as former advocates, political operatives, and, in order to make them less of a target, in order to sort of burnish them with a baptism of fire in our 9.5-month program, in which they definitely use everything they've learned in their previous lives in those roles, in terms of finding stories and everything, but are now having to really take on the role of a journalist and all of the standards that we hold, which include social media. And at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about how many news outlets in the U.S. have guidelines, manuals, standards that they publish online, so that for the sake of transparency, to help journalists understand sort of rules of this presentation. And so you generally want to have links, on your bio, and if you have a certain beat, to state that healthcare reporter, criminal justice reporter, covers immigration. And why is that? Because as a journalist, we're sort of used to, and in the past as journalists, when I was a reporter, a street reporter, to be somewhat anonymous. It's kind of the reason why I got into journalism, was I didn't necessarily like to be, in the front and be a public official, but enjoy the anonymity of journalism. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. We're all public figures in this role, and as such, particularly when we use these platforms, have to be that part. And I was really very excited by the number of followers. Daphne Tolis has 8,000 of them. Uses hashtags to identify herself as a fixer. If I was an ABC reporter from the United States looking for a fixer to come and check out what happened with that earthquake, that little baby earthquake that happened yesterday, I would do a search on Twitter and probably find her very quickly. So how do journalists use social media? We do it to ask questions. A lot of times students are hesitant to get on social media because they feel as though they have nothing to say or they shouldn't say anything. And, the truth is, we use social media to interact with an audience. So it's good to be in the mindset of saying, let's ask questions. We search for sources. We piece together investigations. We share content. And it's a wonderful thing, too, to share content, even, of your competitor, because we're all journalists in this game. And I think it's important, particularly in this climate where there's so much distrust of journalists, to advocate for each other, engage with audiences, and share even our experience as reporters. I find it very interesting to follow reporters like one in the United States named Lilia Luciano, who works for CBS, who will do little videos in between her 2.5-minute packages on CBS about natural disasters, protests, ICE raids, and give her thoughts. They're not opinions, they're just observations, but they're so interesting and in many ways personal that it helps open that door to the public, her audience, the audience of CBS, to talk about her experience. For example, when she covered the Maui wildfires, there was a video that she had on her Instagram in which she talked about how it really struck her personally as a Puerto Rican woman to see how islanders in that community were devastated, feeling about this tragedy and the idea that they weren't going anywhere. This was their home. That sense of ownership, that sense of protection, that sense of, pride of being an islander. She said, I understand it as a journalist. And I remember reading and watching that and just getting goosebumps because I just thought, wow, like she really is invested in this story, understands it, and I'm going to keep watching her coverage. So the two ways reporters use social media, more specifically, would be in breaking news and in using what we call UGC, user-generated content, and then, of course, official sources. Many times, as in the case of Donald Trump and others, they communicate only through social media. And so you actually have to have an interaction with them on it, or you're forced to. It's never the ideal, never the ideal. And we use it to do crowdsourcing. If you Google crowdsourcing, it's generally not something that that you'll find on Google relates a lot to journalism. Sometimes it's related to companies trying to measure their market. But crowdsourcing in our business is a technique that I just think is amazing, that can produce a lot of wonderful stories and data. The wildfires were a really interesting phenomena to see play out in social media, because if you were watching any of the networks, the major television networks, news networks, there was like a lot of the same photographs. Or if you went onto digital news outlets, I kept seeing these, very compelling photos. Or there was one with the firemen that were asleep on the side of the road that got a lot of attraction. And that's great. I think that can sort of like develop into an echo chamber, and then the original taker of that picture is just lost because the photo just goes everywhere. So for me, because I do think that one of the most important things to be able to do as a journalist is to do original reporting, right? To find stories that no one else has, and to help grow this audience, is to dig a little deeper, to spend a little more time, to find innovative ways of locating people. And so, when I look for content, I'm looking for just, this is home decor, wife, NY, California, wildfires raging near Patra, Greece, flames closing in on homes as helicopters fight to save the town. I don't know if she's in Greece, but she's doing this in a very personal way, and I would reach out to her. And here's another one. It's not even so much the original poster that will draw one's attention as a reporter. Sometimes it's someone in the comments that can help, that will say something that's like, my house is about to explode, or something that you're sort of like, oh, and you DM that person. It was Katerina who reminded me that as a broadcaster, she could identify, raw social media or user-generated content because it is always in a vertical and never in a horizontal position. But in this particular event where protesters blocked a cruise ship from Israel. I think that some of the footage from this particular doc was and others was really compelling, and it showed a lot more than what you were seeing. You know, sometimes they'll just show the arrest of these folks rather well after they had assembled, you know, and there's a difference obviously between seeing something like that, a huge flag with lots of people, and then the aftermath. Hortensia is someone who actually lives in Long Island and posted this photograph that was also really compelling. Look how close the fire is to the water. Scary day yesterday for me as a mom and abuela, means grandma in Spanish. Nicole and Joe, Kim and Pete, and all my babes are vacationing in Chios, Greece, where Pete's family is from, and they got caught up in the wildfires happening there. They were told to evacuate from the beach. They were the city and thankfully are okay, and as of now, I've not heard any deaths since. Good evacuation system in place, and people listened. The first 2 pictures are on the beach. They were 2 days ago. You know, if I was a journalist, I'm going to call her because look at how much detail is in this post, right? The more detail, the less likely it's going to be fake, and the more data that you have to work with. TikTok. You know, do you recall when TikTok was just the sort of a dance site where teenagers would post little routines? Well, you obviously know that beyond the marketing, beyond the influencers and all that, there is a lot more news. There's a lot more news content appearing. And not just news content, but content that helps us understand where our countries are going, how attitudes are shifting, how people are surviving in, you know, these difficult economic moments. You know, many people, rightly so, blame the news media for really not understanding what was driving the voting bloc in support of Donald Trump's election in 2016. We just missed it. We just missed these red states and what was happening there. Didn't talk to the people, you know. Why? Local journalism is dying. That's one reason. And then this time around too, we've made a lot of mistakes. But I personally, and this sort of happened in the TikTok again, my daughter sort of, you know, during the pandemic turned me on to this before I lost my mind. But in looking at it, not like a teenager, not like, you know, makeup connoisseur, although I am somewhat both. I was looking at it as a journalist, really trying to hear what people were saying. And when Black Lives Matter exploded onto the scene in that same summer of the pandemic in 2020, all of a sudden this new content started appearing there. We couldn't leave our houses. So this was all I was seeing, and I learned a lot by watching these scenes of people in various cities. They weren't just protesting, there were counter-protesters there. There were people speaking about their experiences. And a lot of analysis of TikTok showed that it was really becoming, as this Inside Climate News headline shows, a go-to source for real-time videos of hurricanes and you know, all sorts of stuff. So, you know, it didn't take very much to find the original posters and, you know, to ask, why is the crane in the bathroom? And get the crane's name and find out, you know, tell a really great story about this zoo that had to evacuate its animals. There were these, and still are, confessionals in TikTok and Instagram of people. They're always in their cars for some reason, talking about why they back President Trump. This person, why I back the blue. This was during the Black Lives Matter, where there was sort of a counter-protest movement supporting the police, because so much of Black Lives Matter was anti-police. This, you know, it drove a lot of sentiment, you know, critical of Black Lives Matter and very much in support of the Back the Blue movement. And you would also see these confrontations. You know, in broadcast news, you sort of see like the protesters getting arrested. You'd see maybe some scuffles, but there was never really like interaction between protesters. What were they saying, right? And so in these longer videos, you would see these conversations. You could see the signs a little better. You really got a sense of why our country is so divided, honestly, in ways that you just cannot. Reading journals, reading the New York Times, reading the Atlantic, reading the New Yorker, reading these fancy magazines and newspapers that, you know, do a lot of analysis but aren't necessarily on the ground the way that this platform allows us to be. Social media is also a very key part of what we know as visual forensics and open source intelligence reporting. There are particularly 3 in the United States, new platforms that do this work with a whole team of people. It's expensive work, but it usually results in some really profound report and impactful reporting. And we're lucky to sort of be able to have a lot of the speakers from these particular groups, not just coming to the university, but actually working on our faculty. And I'll describe that in a moment. You know, prior to well, certainly now, where the conflict in Ukraine is one of the top stories and continues to be, you know, the war in Ukraine used to be known as the TikTok war. Why? Because there were so many young people in these communities that were just using their phones to document the aftermath of missile strikes, the aftermath of bombings, the aftermath of civilian shootings and stuff. And so it resulted in a way for news organizations who aren't there, who are not allowed in the conflict zone, not allowed to operate necessarily in Russia or maybe even Ukraine because of the danger. One of our former graduates was shot by Russian soldiers trying to cross a checkpoint in Kyiv. And so, you know, so you get this sort of wonderful aerial view, and this isn't data that's government data. It's not scraped from, you know, a source from any of these countries or the United States. It's all from social media. The Russia-Ukraine Monitor Map is a crowdsourced effort by the Center for Information Resilience and Bellingcat, which you all may be familiar with, is a wonderful investigative site. And I really was very interested in this conflict intelligence team. If you click on that, the Center for Information Resilience does this really wonderful work and creating these documentaries. As the headline says, they're providing digital witness to human rights abuses and war crimes. And again, a lot of this material is going to be user-generated content by victims, by neighbors, by officials. This one is also really fascinating, the Conflict Intelligence Team. You can follow them on social media. They have a website. And I'm very interested in that sort of the logo here. It says Conflict Intelligence Team, OSINT and HUMANT. HUMANT. Do you know what HUMANT is? We know that open source intelligence, OSINT stands for open source intelligence, which you find online. What's HUMANT? It's human intelligence. It's interviewing people. It's talking to them. It's, you know, calling them on the phone, going to their basketball games, you know, going to their union meetings, right? This was one of the really interesting investigations that the Washington Post and its forensic team, it's, again, a lot of people, a lot of equipment, a lot of time, a lot of verification, which we'll talk about on Thursday. As noted here, videos posted online show the streets of Itaewon in Seoul throughout the night of October 29, 2022, when a fatal crowd crush occurred during Halloween festivities. Again, they give the sources here. You remember seeing this tragedy. It was a really unusual thing to happen, but very unique in the idea that it was the South Koreans celebrating Halloween. I didn't know that was a big thing in South Korea. But because of the demographic, everybody had a phone. And so when the crush was happening, those same phones and security cameras would capture people holding their phones. And in some cases, you could see the time on their phones, you know? And I was just so impressed at how it wasn't just a retelling of it. It was sort of a timeline that showed a real failure on the part of officials to contain that crowd and to respond to the victims. Of course, one of the most famous investigations that many people conducted, this one is the New York Times Day of Rage, January 6th attack. That's a link that I'll spare you for now, but when you watch it, it does what a lot of really great investigations do, and it's incredibly transparent in the sense that it explains from the very start of the film, the documentary, how they did it. You know, usually that's something that happens in the end, or might be some credits at the end. No, the Maliki, I'm sorry, his last name is escaping me, but he runs the show and he narrates the film. Maliki Brown. He explains how the investigation was culled from cameras, from official records regarding the Capitol Police, from security cameras that can also be FOIA'd footage, and perhaps most importantly, from the protesters themselves, who proudly filmed themselves attacking the U.S. Capitol and then uploaded it online. This is how convinced they were that what they were doing was sort of a righteous act, and it made for some very compelling TV, as Donald Trump himself said, but probably said, but I should probably check that. I think I recall him saying that. But also that it was really important footage, evidence put together by journalists. Another example, the New York Times' use of social media content was by our professor, Azmat Khan, who won a Pulitzer Prize for this investigation called The Uncounted. Anand Gopal worked with her on it, and it was basically an investigation of the impact that U.S. and U.S. allies' precision bombings, if you will, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria had resulted in many more civilian casualties than what was previously reported or thought. And as she too explains, you know, it was called from a lot of very sort of like open source materials such as satellite imagery and Google Earth to help kind of situate where a lot of these places were bombed. So you definitely got an aerial view to see the devastation, but Azmat Khan was also on the ground to talk to these families and to tell their story. Ahmad al-Layla tried to persuade his parents to escape from Mosul with his sister Ayman and joined him in Erbil, but they were stubborn, his father. So you sort of understand like what happened. And then the number, that's 3. She counted them herself or with this team, an amazing team. Put a face to a number, put faces to numbers, you know, so very important. I think we lose that. On 9/11, one of the Pulitzer Prize winning investigations did just that, and gave a story, a face, a background to every victim of that tragedy, and took a ton of people to do it. I myself did some similar work for the Miami Herald, and I will never forget going to Weston, I believe it was definitely a gated community, to talk to the mother of one of the victims. And I always tell my students, you know, it's important that you have that fear on the other side of the door when you're going to knock on it, and that hesitation to knock on it. If you didn't, I would probably think something was wrong with you. But it's important to do it because in the end, that person wants this story told, and in some ways wants to tell the story not of the person's death, but how they lived. Crowdsourcing is, we are the home of the Tao Center that does an incredible amount of great research in digital media, and they explore and analyze a lot of these new trends, and crowdsourcing is one that they looked at and created a guide for. I hope that link still works. Crowdsourcing is the act of specifically inviting a group of people to participate in a reporting task, such as news gathering, data collection, or analysis through specific targeted open call for contributions, personal experience, documents, or other contributions. The types of crowdsourcing that the Tao Center pointed out would be witness, sharing what you saw during a breaking news event, sharing your personal experience, providing specialized expertise. So many people in these communities, and they don't necessarily have to have a PhD or a title behind their name. They just happen to be experts on, lobster populations off the coast of Bar Harbor, to accomplish a task or to actually vote in an online poll. My colleague, Professor Daniel Alarcon, created this award-winning podcast called Radio Ambulante that covers Latin America. And in this particular poll, it asked via social media, what are the 4 episodes that we've done during this season that you've enjoyed the most? And put some examples here and tallied them up. Oops. ProPublica has really mastered the call out to its audience. In this case, have you been harmed in a medical facility? Help us inform our reporting on patient safety by telling us about your experience. You could, and sort of it describes the story and what it is. Again, it's this transparency. This is what we're looking for. We know that the numbers are out there, but because of privacy issues, we can't just grab these records from hospitals and doctors' offices. So we need the public to tell us. And they have this online survey, really just kind of, this is not all-inclusive, this is really just to kind of, narrow down the field and really be very specific. Again, these stories have great impact. On Facebook, a group was created of people who had these experiences of being harmed after being hospitalized. And look how big this number is. It's 4,690 people, which is amazing. This project was done by The Guardian, and as I recall, realized that there was no database that the government had that recorded the numbers of people, or even where they are, or their stories, or anything, or their circumstances in which they were shot by police. And the circumstances varied, but they were never counted. They were never put in any type of database. And so The Guardian set out to correct that, and again created a Facebook group that was so successful, it ended up having to sort of abandon the project. It says, the counted will not be tracking officer-involved deaths in 2017. Why? Because the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the FBI have committed to reforming how they track officer-involved deaths, partly in response to The Guardian's investigation. Our journalists remain committed to covering criminal justice. So, for those of us who got into this business because we wanted to make real change in our communities, this is one example. Here's sort of like a quick and dirty, really dirty, example of how WNYC, which is a local not-for-profit radio station, asked listeners after a storm, hey, have the snowplows come and cleaned your street yet? And in asking that question was able to really map They received a lot of calls from Brooklyn. They sort of had a whole story about it, but you could see, based on the map, where streets were clean, which is actually a really cool thing to have in real time. Because if I was trying to get to work, I'd see that map and be like, ooh, I'm not going down that street. We don't usually hear about that. We hear traffic reports, we hear weather reports. We don't always find out about whether or not our route to work or to school is clear. They use WhatsApp to send these things. So they can't just put these things on their websites. Not everybody gets up in the morning and reads ProPublica, you know what I mean? And so you have to find these communities, these subcultures on Facebook who gather together and find each other and form groups, form channels, form all kinds of little communities on social media. Here's one of the more recent. Do you have information about the CICOT deportations? CICOT is that prison in Salvador where a lot of U.S. immigrants have been sent. And no information from the government about any of them, not even for their lawyers. It's a real mess, really. And so in this case, ProPublica is using a team to track them down. And in doing so, notice, Perla Treviso, the reporter here, has to be very available. Again, there's no real anonymity in this part. She not only puts her email, she's got her Twitter account, she has a Signal account, she puts her cell phone number there, it's probably a burner phone that she uses just for this assignment, but still, you have to be as available as possible. There is an immigration-focused nonprofit that works in New York City called Documented that realized very early on that a lot of immigrants use WhatsApp to communicate, and so they, in Spanish, are inviting users to track them. Did you know that TikTok has this thing called channels for everything that you could imagine that focus on everything from, when I teach this class in Barcelona, I always try to look to see, what groups exist there. That Barcelona, that's for football, so it's going to have like 40 million, but there are others there too that you can find. I was looking for expats in Spain, expats in Greece, expats everywhere. People in the United States are moving all over, and it's very interesting to track them. Oh, and this headline, I'm sorry, I don't have the reference here, I'll find it, that Latin American migrants who are using TikTok to share their journey to the U.S. border was phenomenal. I mean, I just would, flock to something like that. When you've got people going through the Darien crossing there, the Darien Gap, which is one of the most deadliest places to cross to try to make your way to the United States from Latin America. It's incredible, the number of people that were taking this journey, and if I don't have to if I can't be with them and risking my own life, the next best thing is to see it in real time, possibly on these channels. It's very easy to create an online survey. You can do it on Google for free, on Google Forms. And I really try sometimes just as a lesson for my students to have them just play with these tools to sort of see what they can make and what kind of questions could be asked in such a survey. Certainly, you need alerts. You need to master the Google Alerts system so that nothing escapes your attention from your beat, whether it's a subject area beat like healthcare or a community that you cover or specific individuals. You can use Google to even search social media just with this command, cite facebook.com, and this is the fires, and the second one is the earthquake. Did I misspell it? Oh, yes. I was... Who posted what is a very cool tool that will allow you to kind of sift through all of the clutter that is on Facebook when you want to just find a specific time frame or a location where this very popular platform exists. And it makes a search I tend to be one of these people who will go down a rabbit hole and it'll take me like 3 hours to find one thing. And it's very important that you learn to make your job easier than that. You know, I'm one of those people who was intent on finding the needle in the haystack, but then not listening to, people who could show me how to do this in a much more pointed way. But now I do. Live posting and streaming is something that can always be done with a phone. And we do these for all types of news events: local news, protests, debates, natural disasters, elections, sports, events, conferences and seminars. I was doing that yesterday in support of my colleagues and trying to learn what vibe coding is. Now I feel extremely cool because I put that post on LinkedIn with an explanation of what it is and was able to quote, my colleagues. I'm not in a newsroom anymore, but I still have those speedy fingers that can get a full quote like that. And I think those are very important skills to maintain, because even if you're a long form writer, even if you're a data journalist who does, who works with numbers a lot more than anything, there will come a moment when you have to capture, because your tape recorder is broken or the electricity is out, someone's verbatim quote. Not a paraphrase, not something, ripped off from another news outlet, but something you heard with your own ears. So it's always good to practice that. The first steps of doing this sort of thing when you're in the moment is to collect hashtags of names, locations, and use them as keywords. It's an art form, really, because, for example, I woke up last night and knew that I was going to be looking at this earthquake to sort of update this, and there's always a story, and so I looked it up, and sure enough, there it is. The Greek word, it does say earthquake, right? Okay, good. In Spain last year, it was the Dana, which is translated to Depresión Aislada en Nieves Altos. That was the flooding that you saw in Galicia and other Spanish Mediterranean coastal towns that were just devastated by these floods. And that hashtag could take you right to a lot of these locations. Club Q was an LGBT club that was attacked by a shooter. And it was the kind of event that sparks a lot of advocacy. And so the Club Q became a rallying cry. People were posting their stories, their support, and things like that. It was a phenomenon. Hashtags are really, as you'll see, sort of very much in play, and sometimes a very important tool for journalists. No King's Day, that was the continuing protest movement against Donald Trump. And it's still active. If you ever sort of trying to figure out what the No King's Day in Austin, Texas are doing, that's the hashtag you'd use. Dana actually found some really interesting things, including entire Facebook pages that were devoted to the missing. A lot of them were pets, but some of them were people that were missing. So, you had a whole page full of them. The page was created by citizens to help find their loved ones and their animals. But as a journalist, it was very, very helpful to find these people and talk to them. You can use the different methods that pop up every once in a while to geolocate places. I actually really tried this last night, and I was, it was hard work, really, because the earthquake was in the sea. It was in the Aegean Sea last night, or early this morning. But there were lots of different towns that were mentioned, and it was confusing as a reporter, reporters not familiar with Greece, to look into it. So I went to an authoritative source, the USGS, the U.S. Geological Society? No, it's a government agency that tracks earthquakes, and it's usually the go-to for someone who wants to find out information about an earthquake. So you can see right here that the longitude and latitude are listed there, and so that can be helpful in pinpointing where you're gonna look. But you can also just type in near because in articles I found out that Niastiros was the closest town that got hit, and with a lot of tourists there and everything. And so, using that search term Niastira, I found this woman, who talked about very strong impact. And in the comments, which I wasn't able to put there underneath, you could see a lot of people talking about what they felt. We all know what we felt. It was just kind of like a little shimmy, but down there, but in that area, it was much more. And here, we have Christian Lopez, who, was clearly right on the scene and very easy to find after doing a geo search there. You can also search by location on Instagram. A lot of it is old content, but you can get lucky with something that's more recent. When you do these searches, sometimes people won't use the word earthquake, or shooting. Sometimes they'll just say, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, or sometimes they'll use the F word or the S word or, whatever else. And so sometimes using that search term can help you, find the people that you're looking for. Advanced searches on X, still there. Sadly, not incredibly useful, but if you know how to use, depending on the event and depending on the keyword, it can be a good tool. Everyone usually mentions it in conversations about social media reporting. I find it maddening, but it's there. Ooh, this other source archive today is very cool because, like the Wayback Machine, it will focus more on posts that have been deleted. Now, there's, when these, especially shootings happen, we have this horrible job again. It's the equivalent of knocking on the door, but in this case, it's in front of the entire world on social media. And when DMs are closed, when a person isn't necessarily someone you can sort of, try to reach quietly behind the scenes, sometimes reporters, in this case, this was a campus shooting that happened in 2015, and you see, holy God, OMG, right? And then you see reporters here, hey, Sarah Seidner. Actually, I know Sarah Seidner. She works at CNN. Can you call me? I'm with CNN. Follow me back, And then you see people just railing, on the journalist. How dare you reach out to that person, It's part of our job. And sometimes you have to have a very thick skin when you do this. There's nothing wrong with asking, you know what I mean? And it can be painful, but we do it. This was TikTok was also a real wealth of witness. I remember seeing a lot of witness people who had been there getting on TikTok to talk about what they saw. I saw that also in the aftermath of the I think it was a Astroworld death of kids at a rap concert who immediately after the concert, they're still wearing what they were wearing. They still have the badges or whatever they had, and talking about how they barely escaped being crushed. What had happened. I mean, there are not a lot of reporters who could get that close to these young people, and they're young, but they're not babies. They're in their 20s. They're in what I would consider fair game. Personally speaking, I never would interview little children without their parents present. It's just, it's not sort of a written rule anywhere, but it's really just it's an ethical thing, it's not fair. If it ever gives you the ick, it probably means you shouldn't be doing it, and you don't have to do it. You can be a better reporter and use other avenues to get a conversation with a child. After this most recent school shooting at a Catholic school in Minneapolis, the Ascension Catholic School, one of the most powerful interviews was a little boy, and I I assume his mother was right with him, telling his story of survival inside and how his friend jumped on top of him to save him. The reason why these stories are so important, I just want to say, one of my friends won a Pulitzer Prize with the Washington Post team to talk about and show, with very carefully selected photos, the impact of an AR-15 on a little body in the Uvalde shooting. Uvalde is a town about 30 miles from where I grew up. And she showed this, and I remember seeing it and posting it and saying, don't look away, look at this story. And ultimately won the Pulitzer because of the precision of that reporting, the investigative techniques needed to get that story with a timeline, but also just, the impact of it, the physical impact. Of course, having blood and gore is certainly an extreme thing, and there are a lot of arguments and probably Neiman reports on this sort of thing, analysis. But ultimately, as a reporter, former reporter, I can say that I feel that it is important to get as close to the scene as possible with the permission of victims and their families in order to show the impact to the best in the best way that you can, in the fullest way that you can. My friend Emily Wax at the Washington Post, who was a foreign correspondent, a J School grad with me, who really specialized in doing these types of stories, narrative nonfiction, that is to say, the long stories, or sometimes they're referred to as second-day stories. So it's not just the first, okay, here's the impact, here's how many missing, but finding, via social media, a really crazy story of survival, or of resistance, or of ingenuity. And in this case, she found via Facebook, I believe, a family that resulted in this story. Desperate to find grandma, a family hit the road with bikes and chainsaws. After Helene, this was a storm that tore through Carolina, Beth Holmes couldn't get in touch with her grandmother, so she and her family set off on an expedition to find her. When you read this story by Emily Wax, you will feel as though you are right there. That's the kind of reporter she is. She interviews people and finds out everything from the clothes they were wearing to the make and model of the car that they used. And it's a lot of work. And there are long phone calls and a lot of apologies when you call them back 6 times. But just that one hook turned this story into something that really explored the full impact of this storm on this community where it really doesn't normally happen. The ethics thing is something that I think is a very important part of the conversation. This Eyewitness Media Hub doesn't exist anymore, but I imprinted some of their pieces of advice, that we think about physical safety of the people that we talk about, that we ask permission to use the material. You really do have to ask permission, even though it's out in the open. That person has the rights to the images, and so it's very important to get their permission to use it. And to think about what would be the consequences, and is the public interest in knowing and seeing this, really important and outweighs whatever risk might be associated with it. Really thinking through those things, even when you just have a few minutes to do it, is something that is part of the training in our craft, and we spend a lot of time talking to our students about it. Crediting the person who took the photo is very important. We don't always necessarily do that. It may be implied in the text, but in the caption, you want to put in courtesy of so-and-so via their LinkedIn account. You know that a lot of news outlets have their own ethics handbook when it comes to social media. This is NPR's, one of the strictest, in my opinion, that really tells not just its reporters, but the general public how to think about their roles on social media. In this case, the line between private and public activity has been blurred by these tools. Information from a Facebook page, blog entries, and tweets, even if they're intended to be personal message to friends or family, can be easily circulated beyond the intended audience. The content, therefore, represents us and NPR to the outside world, as do our radio pieces and stories for NPR.org. This applies to the people and organizations we choose to friend, or like online as well. The tendency of reporters to say retweets are not an endorsement has kind of faded away, but I still feel it's important to do it. The New York Times has its own social media guidelines, about not expressing partisan opinions, political views. Now, all of this seems very obvious, right? But it still happens, and you're seeing a lot of consequences of these statements online or on the air in which broadcasters are being fired, just fired like that for statements. Nothing is private, and we know that better than anyone. Sometimes being in online groups, as an investigator, maybe something that we think of as being undercover can be interpreted a lot of different ways and make us a target. I think the rule of thumb, and what I try to tell students, is that transparency is very important. Just letting people know that you're there, that you're listening and watching, and that you want to talk to them. And that and sometimes you're negotiating. Like, I wouldn't spill, unless it was a really racist diatribe online between city council officials. You're weighing that person who's doing it, the circumstances, the words that they use, all of those things factor into decisions about what to use. On Thursday, I wanted to kind of talk about some of our materials at Columbia that we've used and produced over the years to help guide people's decision making when using social media. But I'm always really happy to have conversations about this too, because I know that for many people, these issues are never black and white. But just in general, keep in mind that though you want to not turn into one of those droids who's just, falling into this black hole of content, that you have it as a go-to when you need it to find it. And on Thursday, we'll talk, because right now it sounds very easy. It sounds like it's, a well of information, but obviously, and as we're learning through our discussions in this conference and the other conference about AI, we obviously have a lot of work to do as we collect this information to verify that the data is not, there are AI influencers now with lots and lots, tens of thousands of followers, that we're not falling into the trap of mistaking those people for real human beings, and that we're checking their stories and what they have to say to the extent that we can in particularly breaking news situations. And that's what I got for you today. Any questions or comments, rebuttals? Mm-hmm.
You said that, and that's true, in Greece, social media continue to be the main source for journalists and for the people in general, I think, the public, continue to be the main source for the news in order to get the news or share the news. What is the situation in the US? I mean, especially for journalists, is that the same situation, something similar?
I think it is very similar, and you can look at the Muckrack report and the Reuters Institute. Those definitions of what is news, I think, is a little fuzzy, because they may be looking at a news outlet that is really much more like a propaganda machine rather than a legitimate news outlet. We have lots and lots of debates in the United States about what defines news and whether a credential, particularly like in the hall of the White House press room, what would qualify. But in general, we're and we don't have licenses in journalism, but in general, there's, legacy media, New York Times and so forth. There's a whole ecosystem of nonprofit news that will sometimes be referred to as fake news or liberal news with an agenda, et cetera, and then those on the opposite side of the spectrum that I think are also eyed with a great deal of skepticism. So I think, again, in these particular case, the rule of thumb is transparency. And anytime you see a piece of news, to look up, I always do this, who we are. Go down to the bottom of the webpage, look up, see who's funding Yesterday, my colleague gave a really great presentation, the vibe coding, in which he talked about how the data collected in the analysis of, the articles in this particular news outlet in Wyoming showed, a real bias to far right on issues and anti-trans rhetoric, just by examining the verbiage, and that was very helpful in explaining to the people of Wyoming, who owns and operates that news outlet and what their message generally is. I wish there were more like them. But yes, it's a kind of a fuzzy world in the United States as well, but also, hugely popular more and more every day as trust diminishes to a certain extent, but also as news outlets are finding a way to penetrate these platforms themselves, not by making goofy TikToks necessarily, but by being useful. I always feel that that's the primary reason people will click on content, is because it's useful to them, and that news outlets face the challenge of making sure their content speaks to their audience. Again, this generally needs to happen through local journalism. A sense that there are people on the ground, reporters with the skills that we're trained with, to express and explain and convey what are the needs of a community. Yes.
Or even use some photos in our stories, but now with AI, we have to double check them.
Yes.
And we have to be very skeptical and ask, as journalists, first of all, questions to ourselves. Is this video original? Does this video comes from a disaster or an earthquake? Does this video or picture look like real?
Yes, exactly.
So
yes, I should have said at the beginning of my presentation, this is part one. This is like the happy part of the job of using social media. On Thursday, I'm going to talk about the more difficult part, which is verification. And, as I think many of the other presenters this week may tell you, there are many tools. It's hard catching up with the way that AI creates these things, but there are tools. And not all of them are digital. Some of them are, again, using the shoe leather and the phone calls and the direct communication with sources to verify their stories. And some of it is just common sense, there's so many different tutorials that will tell you how to examine with your own eyes to determine. My rule of thumb is, when in doubt, leave it out, or capture it yourself. But yes, it is a threat. I think my main point is to not let the creation of AI deep fakes prevent you from using social media and using the material that may be harder to get now, or harder to get every day, but is still vital, particularly with the absence of local news outlets, to capture in a time of climate change, the real local impact and devastation of floods and wildfires and the like. We just have a duty and a responsibility to do that, regardless of the challenges that AI presents to us. So I'm really happy that an old shoe leather reporter like me could be in a room with so many wonderful innovators working together to do quality journalism that makes it more difficult for corruptors to disparage and destroy.
Thank you very much, Selena. A big thank you to everyone who was this online, and thank you for being here with us. We will continue at the University of Athens. Thank you again.